For a long time, the United Kingdom was a strategic given, an island protected by the sea, a global financial capital, a stable monarchy, a navy capable of projecting power, a diplomatic presence around the world, an army equipped with nuclear weapons, a permanent seat on the Security Council, and above all, a political union between England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. This country was not just a state, it was a system of power. But today the question is no longer whether the United Kingdom is declining. The question is whether the United Kingdom can still remain united, governable, and credible as a great power. Because what stands out is not a single crisis, it's the accumulation. The economy is slowing down, productivity is stagnating, debt is becoming more and more expensive, public services are overwhelmed, local governments are under pressure, and housing is deteriorating. And Northern Ireland remains an open constitutional question. And finally, the Royal Navy, a historic symbol of British power, no longer has the scale it once had. The United Kingdom is not going to disappear tomorrow morning, but it could disappear as what it still claims to be, a credible great power. On Terabellum, we try to understand the balance of power, but to understand a country in crisis, you can't just pile up the facts. Immigration, insecurity, cost of living, economic stagnation, you also have to look at how those facts are presented, selected, and prioritized. This video is made in collaboration with Grand News, a tool I use specifically for that. Compare sources, spot blind spots, and see how the same news story changes meaning depending on the media covering it. Let's take a very British example. Here, on Grand News, we're looking at this topic. The United Kingdom is considering requiring social networks to prioritize reliable news sources. In short, the British government is considering pushing platforms like YouTube, TikTok, or Meta to give more visibility to media outlets considered reliable, especially the BBC, ITV, or Channel 4. What's interesting isn't just the measure itself, but the narrative around it. On Grand News, we see that it's covered by 45 sources, along with their political orientation and level of reliability. And just by comparing the headlines, we can already see very different framings emerging. Some media outlets present this reform as a response to misinformation and the crisis of trust. Others focus more on the risk of political control over information, or even on the state's ability to choose which narratives should appear in your news feeds. That's exactly what interests us. Not to believe one side over the other, but to understand the informational battlefield. With our link grandi.news, grand.news, TV, you get 40% off the Vantage plan. The link is in the description, and you can also scan the QR code on the screen. The first problem is economic. The United Kingdom is still wealthy, but it lacks the momentum of a nation confident in its future. In the first quarter of 2026, British productivity was only 0.4% higher than its level the previous year. Compared to before the pandemic, it was only 2.6% higher. This is a key figure. An economy can survive a bad year. It can absorb a financial crisis, an energy crisis, a recession. But when a country hardly produces any more productivity gains, it slowly loses its room to maneuver. It has less room to maneuver, to spend, to invest, to grow, to rearm. And that's exactly what's happening. The United Kingdom has entered a form of social stagnation. Real wages are rising slowly. Housing costs remain high, infrastructure is aging, and households feel like they're paying more to get less. At the same time, public debt is reducing the government's leeway. In May 2026, the United Kingdom borrowed £23.3 billion in just 1 month. The interest on central government debt reached £11.7 billion in that same month of May. That's the highest level ever recorded. A government can borrow to invest. But when an increasing share of public money is simply used to pay for the past, fiscal sovereignty declines. That's where the political crisis begins. When citizens accept high taxes, they expect in return efficient public services, solid infrastructure, accessible health care, and an understandable administration. Yet in the United Kingdom, this pact is cracking. The state collects a lot, it borrows a lot, but it gives the impression of functioning less effectively. The second problem is that British public services give an impression of general decline. The NHS is the most obvious symbol. In April 2026, according to the BMA's analysis, The waiting list reached 7.22 million cases, which is about 6.11 million patients. Roughly 100,000 patients had waited over a year. This number is not just about healthcare, it's political. The NHS is a key pillar of the United Kingdom's identity. If the healthcare system becomes synonymous with waiting, overcrowding, and loss of trust, then a part of the national contract is deteriorating. Housing shows the same dynamic. In March 2026, the British government estimated that 3,461 people were sleeping on the streets in England on a single night, much higher than the same period the previous year. Yet this number doesn't reflect the entire crisis. It excludes all forms of hidden hardship, like temporary housing, displaced families, young adults living with parents, and workers unable to find housing near jobs. Local authorities are also weakened. The National Audit Office reported that 42 local authorities in England received exceptional financial support totaling more than £5 billion to handle pressures that are now impossible to absorb through normal means. Even universities, another pillar of British soft power, are showing signs of strain. A parliamentary committee documented in 2026 the financial pressures on higher education, the indebtedness of certain institutions, the rise in borrowing costs, and concerns about the sustainability of the sector. Health, housing, local authorities, universities, these are not secondary sectors. They are the social infrastructure of an advanced country. When they all deteriorate at the same time, people no longer see a technical crisis, but a less functional country. The third issue is migration, which must be properly understood. The point is not that immigration would make the United Kingdom disappear. That would be false, simplistic, and analytically useless. The real issue is about state capacity. The capacity to decide who enters, at what pace, for what economic needs, under what integration conditions, and with what administrative resources. For years, the United Kingdom has seemed to be subjected to some of these flows. Net migration fell to 171,000 people in 2025, according to the ONS. This is a sharp decrease compared to the peak of 944,000 reached in March 2023. But this decrease comes after an exceptional period, and long-term immigration remains high. 813,000 people arrived in the United Kingdom in the year ending December 2025. So the political problem is twofold. On one hand, the country needs labor, international students, skilled workers, healthcare staff, and service personnel. On the other hand, part of the population feels that the state no longer controls entries, costs, housing, asylum, and returns sufficiently. Small boats are at the center of this perception crisis. For the year ending in March 2026, British statistics indicate about 44,000 arrivals detected via illegal routes, of which 39,000 came by small boats, which is about 90%. The issue then becomes less demographic and more institutional. When a state can no longer convince people that it controls its border, it loses a fundamental attribute of its sovereignty. And when this impression combines with the housing crisis, administrative overload, and budgetary pressures, it becomes political fuel. The fourth problem is political. Since the Brexit referendum in 2016, the United Kingdom has gone through an abnormal number of leaders. In July 2026, after the announcement of Keir Starmer's resignation, the country was heading towards its seventh prime minister in 10 years. That's significant. Democracy can change its leader, but when it keeps changing direction, it creates uncertainty. Administrations wait, investors wait, allies wonder, voters become radicalized or disengaged. Britain's two-party system, long presented as a model of stability, is fracturing. At the end of June 2026, YouGov puts the Reform UK at 24%, ahead of the Conservatives and Labour, both at 20%. This is not just a poll. It's the symptom of a system that can no longer channel anger through these two major traditional parties. Brexit was supposed to restore sovereignty. Above all, it opened up a decade of conflicts over what British sovereignty still means. Parliamentary sovereignty, border sovereignty, economic sovereignty, territorial sovereignty. The United Kingdom is not only lacking growth, it is lacking direction. And when a country no longer clearly knows which path it wants to follow, it becomes more difficult to hold together interests as different as those of London, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and the disadvantaged English regions. The fifth problem is that the United Kingdom is not a simple nation-state. It is a union. England dominates demographically and politically, but Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are not mere regions. They are constituent nations with their own institutions, political memory, and distinct interests. In Scotland, the 2014 referendum resulted in a 55 to 45 vote against independence. But more than 10 years later, the Institute for Government points out that opinion remains deeply divided, with nearly half of voters still regularly supporting independence in polls. It's not a decisive majority, but it's enough to make the union fragile. In Northern Ireland, the situation is different. Remaining in the United Kingdom is still supported by a significant part of the population. But the constitutional question remains open, especially since Brexit, which has changed the balance between London, Belfast, Dublin, and Brussels. So the danger is not an immediate explosion. The danger is wear and tear. A political union holds if its components believe they have an interest in staying together. If London appears as an unstable center, fiscally constrained, socially frayed, militarily weakened, and politically erratic, then the unionist argument loses its strength. The United Kingdom might not break apart all at once. It could gradually lose its cohesion. Finally, there is military power. The United Kingdom still has nuclear weapons, it still has professional forces, it still has a defense industry, and it still has significant intelligence capabilities. But the military's overall size has diminished. The Royal Navy is the most telling symbol. According to a briefing from the House of Commons published at the end of 2025, the combined fleet of frigates and destroyers had only 14 major ships left as of October 2025. 5 frigates, 6 destroyers, and 2 aircraft carriers. For a country that built its power on mastery of the seas, this number is stark. It doesn't mean that the Royal Navy is useless. It means that it has to do everything with too little. Protect maritime approaches, escort aircraft carriers, participate in NATO, monitor the North Atlantic, contribute to the Indo-Pacific, protect undersea cables, trade routes, and ensure nuclear deterrence. Even the modern programs are under pressure. The National Audit Office stated in 2025 that the United Kingdom had received 38 F-35s with a target of 48 aircraft by the end of April 2026. In a program affected by delays, financial constraints, and difficulties with the overall program, the United Kingdom still wants to think of itself as a global power, but a global power needs global means. That's the whole British contradiction. The country retains the attributes of its status: a seat on the Security Council, nuclear deterrence, the city, universities, the English language, the monarchy, and alliances. But behind the symbols, the constraints are piling up. Taken separately, each of these problems can be managed. Low growth can be compensated for. An NHS crisis can be addressed through reform. A migration crisis can be handled. A military crisis can be corrected through investment. And a territorial crisis can be contained by policy. But together, these problems form something else: a crisis of national coherence. The economy doesn't generate enough headroom. The state costs more to run. Public services are deteriorating. Housing is weakening society. Immigration polarizes the debate. Traditional parties are fragmenting. The constituent nations have doubts. And of course, the Navy is shrinking. The United Kingdom could therefore disappear in 2 ways, not necessarily through a sudden collapse, not by invasion, not by sudden bankruptcy, but through a slow and gradual decline, reduction of its military power, reduction of its budgetary capacity, reduction of its social cohesion, reduction of its influence. Less incentive for some constituent nations to remain in the Union. One day, the United Kingdom may continue to exist on maps, at the United Nations, in ceremonies, in diplomatic speeches, but no longer exist as a major power that shapes events. It would be a slow disappearance, administrative, budgetary, territorial, strategic, and that's precisely why it's possible. And you, what do you think? Could other nations follow the same path? Thank you very much for watching this video. The Terabellum adventure has been going on for nearly 8 years, and without you, it wouldn't be possible. Nearly 45% of you still watch our videos without subscribing. Please know that it's free, and subscribing as well as liking helps YouTube promote these videos to a larger audience. It helps us a lot to keep creating this content for you. Thank you, and see you next Sunday.